Jesuits weren't in line for the papacy.
Correct. But I was just making a philosophical point.
I would wonder, to what extent, though, has he been all that active and vocal in Argentina against the government, particularly in the early years of the formation of the current government? There's a lot of speculation that he hasn't been as vocal as he could have been back in the 1970s and 80s.
There are accusations, for example, that he was not as active as he might have been in fighting the corruption of Argentina's dirty war and those who are disappearing. Elsie, would you?
No, I've heard that, and I've also heard that Amnesty International cleared him of some of the accusations that had been headed in his direction. But I think he's also grown as a human being, as a man. His interpretation of political, social, ecclesial situations has formed him, and I think that his demeanor, again, going back to, you know, how while Orthodox, really is moving towards a much more simple tone. He addressed the Church of Rome. He didn't take on this pompous, gregarious attitude of I am the father of the global church. I am the father of the Church of Rome, and we have a lot of work to do, and he has a lot of work to do. And I think he might be willing to be much more collaborative and engaging. The fact that he's reached out to Lombardi, who's in charge of the Vatican radio, and wants a more open relationship with him is a phenomenal sign.
A big area of concern, though, you brought up the issue of some priests, and people have alleged, as early as 2005, that he was part of the complicity of silence when the military dictatorship was persecuting fellow Jesuits. At least 2 priests have been identified. And other people disappeared, the dirty war, la guerra sucia. And people in Argentina, some people still think that he was too acquiescing in not challenging the military junta. Now he's been challenging Kirchner. And so, by the way, it's very telling that in 2012, he led the bishops of Argentina in a collective apology for not doing enough for those people in those 1976 to 1983. So in a way, he has acknowledged some measure of the responsibility for that. And people feel that he did not cooperate enough with the democratic governments after '83 in bringing about justice and identifying the culprits in those very dark years. So again, that's going to be something that may or may not come back to haunt Pope Francis I, but it's something that has to be kept in mind. The other question, I just want to summarize is he willing now, if he's willing to confront the government, is he going to be willing to confront his own corruption in the Vatican bureaucracy? Is he willing to confront the culture of corruption, the complicity of silence, the culture of covering up abuses, not at the level of the priests and bishops, but at the level of the cardinals, some of whom voted for him or may not have voted for him in this particular conclave? That's going to be the telling point whether this pope is going to make a difference.
This pope is quoted as having said, "In the Curia I will die," in 2005. So what do you think,
he may be right about that. I mean, he is in the middle of the Curia. I think the cardinals knew what they needed to have in a new pope. One of the things they needed to have was someone who could kind of clean up the complex situation that's over there in the Vatican right now. And so I think this was their man to do that.
So you think he can do it?
I would not be surprised if he does make significant changes in the Curia.
I wonder what type of reform, though. Are we looking for the 10-minute manager, or the consummate administrator, or are we looking for the more Franciscan holy type? That the reform is going to come by way of an interior holiness that this man sort of exhibits.
Excuse me, I beg to disagree. The church doesn't need interior holiness right now.
I think all the problems.
It needs visible holiness.
True.
And it needs a prophetic reformist pope. And in other words, some of these cardinals that have been complicit in the culture of cover-up, that got golden parachutes like Bernard Law. Mahoney is a disgrace to the church, I believe, and I don't think I'm offending the Catholic Church. That Mahoney just gloated about going to the conclave to vote for this pope. This man should have been not allowed to go to the conclave. I think the cardinal from UK because he covered up hundreds of abuses of children. Here is this man tweeting people as if he's very proud of having been there and saying to his detractors, who are you to judge me? You should show the love of Christ. Listen, this is not about the love of Christ, it's about justice.
But Daniel, we also don't understand, you know, who he had reported those abuses before. You know, according to the word that is how things are understood, the Ratzinger knew about every sexual abuse case that had been going on. So, you know, he who eventually becomes Pope was privy to all of the concerns that Mahoney had when he was a bishop. So, I mean, I think it's a very complicated situation in relationship to the sexual abuse crisis. I think Ratzinger knew a lot more as you know, when he became Benedict. He didn't do much then either, and so...
Are you implicating Benedict in the culture of corruption and cover-up?
I think that we will have to see, but I would say that he knew.
Well, first of all, we can't impose modern-day solutions to a very horrendous problem. Back 30 or 40 years, our understanding, the learnings that we've had in the last 20 or 30 years concerning the sickness that was involved in this with the perpetrators, concerning the victimology, just handling it. We're handling things differently today than we did 30 years, yes. Even in families, because in families it would have been handled differently years ago. So
it's time to be more open.
It's not to be excused, but it's also something that is the mishandling of it is not to be excused, but it certainly is understandable because people did not know how to handle it.
But when Sean Brady of Ireland, after the 2,500 report, scathing report by the government of Ireland, they had to intervene. And right now the Vatican is in conflict with the government of Ireland because the government of Ireland wants to take action. Because the government of Ireland feels that the internal mechanisms for correcting these abuses is not working. They asked Brady, why didn't you say anything about over 320 children being abused, including disabled children? You know what he said? Well, because of the complicity of silence. This is a direct quote from this cardinal.
Well, I think that
it's just an amazing thing. He didn't feel he could say anything because to say anything would have been to attack the church, and he wanted to protect the image of the church. That something's broken.
There's no question that this is an important issue that this Pope or the next Pope, some Pope soon, is going to have to address, because it is a sickness inside the church that has to do with abuse of power as well as abuse of people. But there are other things that have to be cleaned up at the Vatican, like the banking situation, for example.
I would just wonder, yeah, right. My original point was that all of these problems seem to stem from a lack of holiness. They've lost a sense of the basics, which is to preach the gospel. And it seems as though this is what this man is after. And in doing that, in placing emphasis on Francis, both of Assisi, as well as, I think, Francis Xavier, the Ignatian, I think we see that he's going to lead by way of example. I would wonder to what extent, though, does he have the fortitude to sort of address these internal issues, particularly the finances and all of the administrative qualities. But he alluded to the fact last night on his opening address that he's going to rely heavily upon his confreres, his fellow cardinals. But I guess it's a wait and see.
Well, his fellow cardinals are the ones who elected him are not only from Rome or in the Curia, they're the ones from throughout the world. So maybe he was referring to collegiality. Right. And one of the problems with the Vatican is it is not a collegial environment. Right. And so he may very well have meant that when he was talking about, I rely on my fellow bishops.
There was an anonymous quote from a cardinal who wasn't named that said that 4 years of Bergoglio would be enough to change things. So at least some of the cardinals see him as a change agent. Do you think, going back to what you said, Henry, and you, Elsie, that this simplicity that seems to be his style, taking the bus instead of a limo and so on, do you think that that's going to set some kind of an example for toning down the imperial trappings, the monarchical trappings of the papacy?
I certainly hope so. I would love to see earthen vessels again. The fact that he wants a wooden cross, the fact that he took off his stole after he prayed and did the blessing, and was in simple attire. I think that it's a 180-degree shift from Benedict. who was much more gregarious and, brought back these medieval robes and trappings that were so fictitious. I think the gospel is really talking about transforming a world and generating a sense of empathy and compassion and love and transformation. And you don't really need all that monarchical power. You need to be with people. And I think his presence yesterday alluded to that very fundamental self-understanding that he is with the people.
He's already created and used different symbols. The very fact, I was struck by the fact that at the end of Mass, when we give a blessing, we ask the people to bow their heads, and we give the blessing over the people. Well, he bowed his head for the blessing over the Pope from the people. I thought that was very significant, and all the other simple little things he's been doing. After all, we're a church of symbol. We're a sacramental church. That's our basic theology. A sacrament is a sign which translates into a symbol many times.
Last question, let's quickly go around. Was this the right choice for the church?
I certainly hope so. I haven't been as excited to be a Catholic in over 20 years, and so I am filled with much hope.
I told my students at FIU, if Christoph Schönborn becomes Pope, I'll rejoin the Catholic Church. People don't know, but I became a Catholic at the age of 12. I wanted to be a priest. And the man under whom I served in Cuba was wonderful. But Christoph Schönborn would have been the right man for the job, in my view. That's what the church needs, a reformer.
Do you think the church would have been ready for somebody that radical at this point?
Apparently not. That's my big concern. Maybe the Italians got away and got one of their own there who will not rock the boat. And that will be a disaster for the Catholic Church.
Maybe the Holy Spirit wasn't ready, perhaps. Henry, the right choice for the church?
If you're a Catholic, it all boils down to a matter of faith in the understanding that these cardinals operate under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So I don't know if any one of us can really answer that. It depends on, I guess, your definition of right. But insofar as that you believe and that you are a practicing Catholic, then you trust that this man is the person whom God saw fit to appoint at this time.
So far, so good. I like what I see. I like what I hear. I think he's doing a good job in 2 days.
Yeah.
We'll be back again after 100 days, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to give him a chance. How long do you think he'll be there? You think anybody could survive the papacy these days
That's an
for
interesting
more
question.
than a few years?
Given the precedent of retirement, one would wonder sooner rather than later, or later rather than sooner. It's really unknowable.
It changes the whole equation.
He's exhibited a mental fortitude that is amazing. To me, the jury's still out, but the fact that he has the energy to take on governments, I repeat again, perhaps he'll have the energy to take on his own government, his own state, and clean up the house of God. This is not a problem with the church, it's a problem with the people who lead it. The church is holy. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. But these men, individuals who rule the church, do not have immunity from the Holy Spirit. And this Pope needs to understand that.
Okay. So it looks like we have Habemus Papam, we have a new Pope. He is certainly going to change the outlook for the church. We hope he will last long enough to have some impact on the church as a whole. And everyone seems pretty upbeat about him, except maybe Dan.
Again, I am going to withhold judgment. I want to see what happens.
Okay, and that's the last word. We're out of time for today's program. I'd like to thank all our guests for joining us.